Welcome to the Tipping Point Show. I'm Jimmy Evans. I'm so glad you've joined me today. I have got a great interview with Jan Markell. She's an end times expert. She has been teaching on the end times for 40 years. She has a ministry called Olive Tree Ministries. She also has a radio program that goes on over 900 radio stations across the country and electronically around the world. You're going to want to see this interview with her. But I just want to say we had a terrific conference last Saturday at Fellowship Church here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Thousands of you attended in person, thousands of others streamed online. I hope that you enjoyed the conference. We've gotten phenomenal feedback from that. And let me just say, if as a subscriber, if you're a subscriber to endtimes.com, here in about 3 more weeks, you're going to get the entire conference for free. Okay, we'll post it here on endtimes.com. Okay, if you streamed, you get another 30 days of free viewing on your stream. If you were not at the conference and you're a subscriber and you want to see it in the meantime, you can go on conference.endtimes.com and you can purchase it at a 50% discount. I think that's like $25. If you're not a subscriber, it would be, I think it's $49 if you want to purchase it to be able to view the conference. But it was a phenomenal conference. I mean, Jonathan Cahn, Mark Hitchcock, Billy Crone, Ed Young, Greg Laurie, myself, a lot of great teaching there, a lot of great things happened. And so thank you for being a part of it if you were, and if you weren't, you can still see it. Go to conference.endtimes.com. It's my great pleasure to have joining me today Jan Markell. She is founder and director of Olive Tree Ministries, a ministry dedicated toward helping believers understand the times and be watchmen on the wall with an end-time perspective. She is also the host of Understanding the Times radio program that now airs weekly on 900 radio stations and also electronically around the world. Jan, thank you for joining me today.
Jimmy, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, I have admired your work for many years, and you are a forerunner of me for sure. You had very large conferences, end-time conferences, and you have your radio program, and you also have your website, Olive Tree Ministries. But I'm really glad that you've joined me today, and we're going to have a great conversation concerning just the things that are happening in the world, the convergence of the things that are happening in the world. And I like the word convergence because people say to you, and I know they say to me, every generation's had signs of the end times. Every generation has had an Antichrist figure, or they've had earthquakes or famines or whatever. But we're the first generation to see the convergence.
Exactly.
Of all the signs. And so let's begin with Russia and the Ukraine, because this is a very significant thing. Some people saying that this is the beginning of World War III. So what do you think about that?
Oh, and maybe it is, but my take on it is that any conflict that doesn't directly deal with Israel or indicate that it's going to ultimately end up in Israel, which of course Putin could end up being Gog, and you know, that's kind of for a little bit later. But if it doesn't involve the Middle East, I don't get real concerned about it. I am concerned for those that are suffering, and particularly in Ukraine. But I think the question, Jimmy, is Vladimir Putin going to continue this aggression and continue the aggression and not just keep moving and try to take, say, the Baltics and some of those countries, but is he going to set his sights on the mountains of Israel? Does he want the natural gas in Israel? Does he want their high technology? And we don't have an answer to that. He certainly could. But I say until a leader puts their eyes on what they intend to do to Israel by way of harm, by way of invasion, I just think that it's more wars and rumors of wars. Now, here's the game changer. The game changer would be if Vladimir Putin unleashed a nuke, because that then, right, I think, takes all of this to the next level.
And of course, he could. He's threatened to do that.
And he's threatening it. That is right.
So at this point, you're saying you don't believe that it's certain that he is Gog?
Well, he's Gog-esque, without a doubt. He's acting like Gog. He's aggressive. He's evil. He surely hates Israel. He surely wants what he can take from Israel. He's aging. How many years does he have left? Maybe he's got another 15 years left. He very well may. But I think we're so late in the game. I think we should keep our eyes on him and what would be his intent towards, let's just say, wanting to seize a spoil, which is wealth,
Right.
in Israel. And Israel has wealth, and I think he would like it. So if you start to see him, and he's I'm suspicious that he could be Gog. I'm going to leave it there because it is speculation.
Let's talk about Iran for just a minute, because I read an article this morning that Russia right now is tightening their alliance with Iran,
Yeah.
which was already very tight.
Yeah.
So they're tightening their alliance there. Now, Iran, without a doubt, is a bad actor. And they are, snubbing the international community related to their nuclear program that's going on. And so what is your belief? We know that they have a nuclear program. We know that. And
Absolutely.
we know eventually they're going to get a nuclear weapon. Where do you think they are in all that right now?
Oh, I think they're on the threshold. And where this nuclear agreement is going, I don't think we quite know. In spite of what some people may think about Donald Trump, he did some things right. And one of the things he did right was dump that nuclear deal with Iran, which began in 2014-15 under Barack Obama, which was the catastrophe of all international engagements, was this crazy, not only do we allow them nuclear capability, and allow them the ability to put nukes on missiles and hit Europe and eventually hit America.
Right.
But then we reward them with billions and billions of dollars. Yeah. This, Jimmy, to me, this is the essence of end-time strong delusion. You can say this is just the nuttiness of a particular political party, and I would accept that. But this goes beyond that to actually finance, become friends with, shake hands with the nation of Iran. At the very same time, they're saying death to America and death to Israel. So it's utter insanity. But what did you folks think the last days would look like? Just like they're looking today. Well,
you're talking about delusion there, and I made the comment at the conference that we had this last weekend. 2 Thessalonians says God will give them over to strong delusion, that they would believe the lie. And of course, Romans 1 says God gave them over to a depraved mind. And my comment there was deception is caused because we have wrong information or because the devil deceived us. But delusion comes from God. That delusion is when God simply takes the ability from a person to even recognize the truth. And you see the foolishness that's going on right now, the sexualization of children in America from the White House. It's delusional to hear these people talk about what they intend to do with the transsexualism and all that kind of stuff. So we live in a deluded society, just the way the end should look.
Right, but I think the days of Noah were that way too. And again, we had we don't have to get into the Nephilim, but we had the aberration of the Nephilim, and we had strong delusion, and we had hardening of hearts, so that there are only 8 really righteous people on the planet. Well, obviously the church is still here, so we have far more than 8, but it's a dwindling number. It's a small number of the righteous. And so I think the comparison, when the Bible says the last days will be as the days of Noah, hello, I mean, it should be really, and your illustration is perfect, Jimmy, and that is what society wants to make little boys girls and little girls boys. And not only that, parents encourage this. Parents want their little girl to become a little boy. What kind of delusion is this? And again, has God just turned them over? I think the 4 scariest words in the Bible are God gave them over. Right. To me, that says, I'm done with you. I've tried to give you the truth. You won't accept the truth. You're turning only to evil. I'm turning you over to this reprobate mind. That's a scary place.
That's a scary place. And I've said this many times, but I started preaching on the end times in 1982, 40 years ago. I never dreamed that I would live in this world.
Right.
I never dreamed it would get this bad. I thought it would get bad, but not this bad.
Yeah.
And so you wake up now and you see the sexualization of children. There's a push to change the designation of pedophiles to minor attracted persons.
Right.
And to destigmatize that, which is unbelievable in any society.
Absolutely. I mean, there are things going on. I mean, changing streams just a little bit, but I'm here in Minneapolis. My office is 20 minutes from where the George Floyd incident happened in 2020. And what came from that? The delusion of let's defund the police. Well, how's that working out for those of you in cities like Minneapolis, where I am? I've lived here all my life. It was a perfectly beautiful city, absolutely gorgeous. Now, since they're defunding our police, it's just crime everywhere. I mean, no one is safe, not even in the suburbs. And again, this comes from this delusional, God gave them over mindset. Let's take away our police. We don't need police. Are you kidding me? So again, irrational thinking that is for sure end time-ish, that again goes back to the days of Noah. This is how they thought back then.
Do you think we're seeing the fall of America?
Oh, well, I was ministering with Jack Hibbs and actually Michelle Bachmann a year ago, right after the Afghanistan debacle. And all of us at that conference, it would have been September of 2021, all of us were grieving over what we felt back in September 2021 was the turning point for America, the point at which America stepped off the international stage, at the point in time at which America no longer became the world leader, thanks to Mr. Biden, and that would be the Afghanistan debacle and leaving people behind, etc. We indicated at that time that we were no longer the world leader, and look at the consequences of America not leading. They're staggering. As we speak, millions are suffering. And whether it's Ukraine, you can find other areas of conflict, because America is not leading. America, because we've led for certainly 100 years, we've had some stability. Obviously, we've had world wars here, but we've had post-World War II, great stability, great prosperity. Now we lack a leader both nationally and internationally, and everything is coming to pieces. Of course, my saying is everything's falling into place. So these things have to happen.
That's right.
So things aren't falling apart, they're falling into place.
Well, President Biden is a disappointment, to say the least, related to leadership on every level. But when you look at the globalism that's going on today, of course,
Right.
he is very much a part of the World Economic Forum,
Right.
been a keynote speaker for them. And you have all these elites that come over to Switzerland every year, and they have an agenda, and their agenda, part of their agenda is the demise of America from being
Right.
a superpower, and really for there not to be the superpowers are today. Talk about globalism and what's happening about globalism.
Well, again, globalism is outlined in the Bible very clearly. I think the most obvious chapter would be Revelation 13. And I think the thing, Jimmy, that I emphasize almost the most in both my radio outreach and other things, my teaching, etc., would be the rise of this World Economic Forum, this Klaus Schwab and his pals, Yuval Harari and Bill Gates, and there's just a whole lineup of them that are wheeling and dealing and scheming in smoke-filled rooms to have the World Economic Forum become the global one world government. But, here's the thing. If that's true, and I do believe it is, and I do believe the fact that we're lacking a global leader is pushing us towards one worldism and a single global leader. How late is the hour? I believe that this whole great reset, I believe the reset is the tribulation. And so we're in a run-up to that tribulation. I believe the four horsemen of the apocalypse are, over a cliff about to appear. The church has to disappear first. Yeah. So globalism has to happen. But what had to happen before that could happen? America has to decline.
Right.
And so it's of the Lord, as hard as it is to watch. every one of your listeners and viewers is brokenhearted to see America's decline in the last 40 years, and certainly the last 10, 12, 15 years. But it had to happen so that this globalist effort, and I believe it's being orchestrated by World Economic Forum, again, Klaus Schwab.
Yeah.
It's on the horizon. It's on the horizon, but that means the church is going to be gone.
Well, I believe the church is going to be raptured soon. I know that you agree with that. Imagine a world, Jan, where the delusion is like it is right now, and the church is gone.
Yes.
There's no restraining influence. You know, literally you have the delusional mindset that is the global mindset, which ushers in the Antichrist, and anything he says they're going to believe because they're set up for it right now. But this is the first time in my lifetime where I know that I'm living in an Antichrist world.
I think if we were to try to pick out a single, and I'm cautious with this, but a single manifestation going on that would indicate how late the hour is, it would be the rise of this Antichrist spirit, whether it's the lawlessness, which we see every night on the news, whether it's countries like Putin acting the way he's acting and doesn't care what the world leaders are telling him. It's just nuts to you. I'm going to do what I want to do. It's or in Washington, if that isn't utter lawlessness going on in Washington, D.C. And of course, that's one of the major signs of the last days. I mean, that's heavily in the tribulation, and much of what we're talking about is heavily in the tribulation. But the point is, we're in this run-up to that tribulation. It's so obvious, and the only way to look at it and have hope is, hooray, the king is coming.
That's right.
It could be today.
That's right. Well, the birth pangs, you know, Matthew 24, Jesus talked about birth pangs. Those birth pangs are happening right now, aren't they?
Yeah, they're going to explode in the tribulation, but there's always, again, we're one of the most frequent things I keep saying is we're trending towards the tribulation.
Yeah.
So when we see the catastrophes, and believe me, they're heartbreaking. I mean, it's hard to watch them as we see parts of the world, the hurricanes, the floods, the fires, you name it. These are just a foretaste of what's going to happen in the tribulation. Nothing that's happening today can even come close to the catastrophes of the tribulation. Why? Which is why it is so important that anybody listening, you know, you don't want to go through that, and there's a way to escape it, and that's to claim Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, and then along with the church, we're going to exit before this terrible time of ultimate birth pangs, which explode in the tribulation. But we're seeing again that run up. I believe God's sending warnings. I believe every catastrophe is a warning from God. Are you ready? If not, get your heart ready.
Well, he's certainly not going to let you be comfortable in this world without a warning that something's happening. So in Matthew 25, when Jesus is talking about the parables of the virgins, the steward, and then the true story of the sheep and the goats, the parable of the virgins tells us that according to Jesus, when he returns, about half the church will be false. In other words, there were 5 wise virgins that were ready and knew the bridegroom. There were 5 foolish virgins. They associated themselves with the bridegroom, but they were walking in darkness and didn't know him. And so do you believe that there is a lot of deception that has infiltrated the church in these last days?
That's probably the second most frequent theme that I address, would be the, shall we say, the wolves among the flock. Yeah. And I'm actually going to tape a radio program tomorrow about this. And, you know, you and I could probably do 3 hours on this topic almost nonstop, because after the biblical references to the rebirth of Israel, which are legion, second to that would be all the biblical verses. People are not going to give heed to sound doctrine. They're going to turn to the doctrine of demons. There are going to be wolves among the flock. So in the New Testament, the constant reference, and then there's the true church. I mean, there's Laodicea, but there's also people are going to still hold on to truth. But are the number of people that are holding to truth getting fewer and fewer and fewer? According to the emails I get, people can't even find solid fellowship today. And they may even be in a Bible preaching church, which is getting harder and harder to find, by the way. That's the most frequent email that comes in here. But they're lacking meaningful fellowship. They're lacking a church that preaches the whole counsel. In other words, Genesis through Revelation. And they'll approach their pastor and they'll say, could you do a series on the last days? And he'll come up with 20 reasons why we can't go there. We can't talk about that. It's controversial. I could go on and on and on. But going back to your question, I think that the wolves among the flock today, it's very scary. People go into a church in good faith, thinking that the pulpit is solid, and then a year later, absolute craziness comes from the pastor. And here's what's happened, at least since the George Floyd incident, the church went woke. I mean, again, that's another program, but the church went woke.
Church went woke.
Yep, and that's social justice. We got to embrace LGBT, the social gospel, and it is destroying our churches.
Well, I have a lot of friends that preach the gospel, the total counsel of the Word of God, and they have people walking out their doors every time they preach. And the good thing is they're willing to do that. Many pastors are not willing.
Right.
They want to be popular. But one of my friends, they were dealing with this transsexualization happening in the public schools. Now, these are very conservative communities with very liberal school boards. And so one of my friends began to confront the school board, and he began to preach about it from the pulpit. This is what's happening in our community and whatever. Well, most of the church supported it, but he said, I was shocked at the number of families that had been in the church for 20 years that confronted me and said, we support that. We don't like your tone.
Okay.
And he was very gracious, very kind, but they didn't like the fact that he was talking bad about transsexuals and the school boards trying to sexualize children beginning in kindergarten and those kinds of things. And this school board was using a curriculum that they got from Lady Gaga on sexualization. Yes, it was unbelievable. And then another one of my friends did a series on woke to the church. Again, very good preacher, very graciously done, and a backlash came to him. Now, most of his people supported it, but and many pastors won't teach on the end times, Jan, even though 30% of the Bible is prophetic in nature. And so when you're not preaching on the end times, you're leaving out a lot of the Bible. And people are so anxious with your ministry and with our ministry. One of the most common comments we get is how people are comforted by knowing. So you've already said it on this podcast right here. You've already said Jesus is coming. All these bad things that are happening are pointing to the fact that Jesus is coming. So this is a comforting message.
Jimmy, I so agree with you, and that's why it's so puzzling. I go to 2 Peter 3 with the kind of the exhortation. In the last days, people are going to say, "Where's the promise of His coming?" I just think that means that the whole topic that's near and dear to you and me and your followers and my followers, people are going to brush it off, scoff, mock, condemn you for believing it. Right. I had one lady who emailed me a year or two ago, and she said, I'm afraid to talk about, she used the word fearful. I'm fearful and afraid to talk about the fact that the king is coming back, because I think what she meant, she gets such pushback from it, from family, friends, and even her church. This, to me, is a complete travesty that we now have people who are holding back, speaking this truth that you and I rather boldly proclaim. People are now afraid that they're losing friends. They're losing church people because it's controversial. It might be perceived as doom and gloom. And then we've got the Harold Campings who blew everything by making a mockery of it and setting dates. And I don't blame anybody for running from the kind of the nutty fringe in eschatology, the Campings and others who have really done damage.
They've done damage. Most Christians, most Christian denominations are amillennial.
Yes, they are.
They don't believe in a literal millennium. They
That's
believe
right.
Satan was bound at the resurrection of Jesus. If you can make that work in your worldview, that's
Yeah,
special.
good luck with that.
Yeah, good luck with that. But then you have the post-millennials, and they believe kingdom now kind of
Kingdom now.
theology. So talk about that. Talk about some of those false doctrines in the church related to eschatology.
I think the biggest change in my lifetime, and I've been in ministry 40 years here, but the biggest change in my lifetime as it concerns the church would be when I was growing up in my Baptist church, we had frequent messages on the importance of Israel, Israel and prophecy, Israel and end times. They never talked about the church is going to prosper and it's going to turn the world around. Now, granted, the church does some missions and all that's hugely important. But what I have seen in the last probably 20, 25 years is the rise of this kingdom now, dominionism. It might also, maybe years ago, it went by the term latter rain,
Right.
Reconstructionism.
Right.
But let's keep it simple. Kingdom now simply means that, and lots of denominations embrace this, that the church will indeed make the world pretty perfect. And then when the church has cleaned up the earth, Jesus can come back. Now, how's that working out, folks? How's
That's
that
right.
working out?
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not, because it's a false teaching. But I would say it's the fastest growing. It's the biggest change in the last 30 to 40 years. The church, the Bible says the church is going to go into apostasy. It's going to become Laodicea.
Yeah.
It's not going to save the planet. So, again, I never thought I would see the day when, and then, Jimmy, the sad part of that is all eyes go off of Israel, which is the key to everything.
That's
If we don't
exactly
keep
right.
our eyes on Israel, that's the time clock to God's end time plan, and that's what we need to be watching is Israel, not the church.
Well, look at Jesus' very graphic illustration of the days of Noah and the days of Lot. Noah didn't have a convert, and Lot
That's
lost
right.
his wife and his sons-in-law. You know,
That's
I mean
right.
that's not a. So Jesus is talking about we're going to be in the vast minority, a righteous remnant, in the midst of an extremely evil, ungodly world. Just before we get rescued, and there's cataclysmic judgment over here, and the kingdom now stuff. And I'm sure you've heard about this, but last Thursday, just about 10 miles from where I'm sitting in DFW Airport, 5 perfect red heifers were flown to Tel Aviv, Israel. Did you hear about that?
Right. Of
Well,
course.
there are many people like you and me that were thinking, oh my gosh, now they can rebuild the temple and this is a big deal. There are many people that don't like this because they're hanging on to replacement theology.
There you go.
They believe when the first temple was destroyed that God divorced the Jews. He has nothing to do with them. They're no longer a part of history. And of course, when they came back in 1948, that was an annoyance to them. And every biblical prophecy that's been happening ever since has been an annoyance. But the fact that they could rebuild the third temple, it just continues to, it's hard to believe when you're looking at the reality of the world today, it's hard to believe that they hang on to the fact that the church is going to go into this glory age and we're going to, overtake all those kinds of things. And there's nothing wrong, obviously, with the church standing our ground until Jesus comes and doing all the good we can do and taking all the people that we can take. But the Bible simply doesn't paint the picture of a victorious world-conquering church when Jesus returns.
And yet, why is it perhaps the fastest growing theology, along with replacement theology, in the church? Again, I think the church today, not all, but so many have slipped into Laodicea.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure we even have time to turn that around. I mean, I'm one who expects the rapture imminent any day. I mean, I think that if those of us who are watching what's going on and trying to interpret it from a biblical perspective, it's obvious things are winding down.
Yeah.
It's obvious time is running out. And by the way, time is running out for people to name Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. So, I mean, that's kind of an ominous warning. But things are winding down so fast, even since in the last 5 years, even in the last year. And I think a huge turning point was COVID. And COVID created a new mindset, not just in America, not just in the Western world. 200 nations changed the way they did business because of COVID.
Yeah.
They went along with whatever the government mandates were. They surrendered to government dictates. This is 200 nations.
Yeah.
And I think they looked for almost a global savior to keep them well, so to speak, and then they turned to government to keep them well. So I think COVID was a turning point 2.5 years ago. I don't think that mindset is going away. I mean, maybe the pandemic is slowing down, though I think that's another program. But I think that COVID was a huge wake-up call to the world and the church.
Absolutely. A lot of people watching right now, Jan, they're good-hearted Christian people who love Jesus. How can they stand strong in the midst of all that's going on in the world until Jesus comes?
Well, we know God has not only everything under control, God is allowing everything to happen. He certainly is not causing, not perpetrating all the evil that we see, but things have to, there's a roadmap in the Bible. And so much of that roadmap is we're now on the highway that's leading towards the very end of the end. And I think that makes this a very exciting, though challenging, generation to live in. Yeah. But God has orchestrated everything. He said the end times would be perilous. He said that there would be delusion in the end times. He said that we need to be encouraging one another, Hebrews 10:25. And I want to encourage your listeners to be in some form of fellowship, even if it's a home fellowship. Yes. Have some kind of support around them. If they can't find a church, and I hear from many who can't, at least get into some kind of a fellowship. Because if you're not going to be encouraging one another, Hebrews 10:25, you won't make it. That's you right. won't make it without some kind of physical or emotional collapse, because things aren't going to get better. And I know people are putting a lot of faith and trust, say, in the elections of 2022 and 2024 and going back to normal. My own opinion is going back to normal probably isn't ever going to happen. We're too late in the game. A trumpet is going to sound any day. The church is going to be removed. Those left behind are going to have something unspeakable to deal with. It's called the time of Jacob's trouble. Yeah. Jacob, by the way, is Israel, not the church. But I encourage people to be encouraged, because for some reason God called every listener, to you and me, to be a part of this generation for a reason. And I think it's to be salt and light and delay the decay, proclaim the gospel, and to encourage people to look up. Jesus is coming any day. That's right. I want you to read, you have a Sure. I'm taking a trip, if you wouldn't mind reading that. Okay, I didn't write this, but I often close with this. It's written by ministry supporter Sandy Tszynski. And one of your producers asked if I could share it, and this will take about 1.5 minutes, and she writes this, and I hope it does encourage. She says, I'm taking a trip to a foreign country, a country I've never seen before. This will be much different than previous trips. She says, I won't need to pack any clothing, no glasses, no medications. My passport has been purchased and authorized with a great price. She says the tour guides on this secure flight will be courteous and swift, and I will pass through security like a breeze. I guess this is a round trip. There will be a layover celebration before I will be returning with an enormous tour group made up of many horse-riding folks. And then she says, there is still room on this flight, and I hope you will be coming, but you'd best hurry as the standby list is filling up fast, the red eye too, and time is running out. And then she concludes, be ready to depart in an instant, and keep watch on the overhead screens, because you do not know what time or gate we will depart from. And then she says, a new name will be given to me in this new country, so my name tag will change. but you will still be able to recognize me by my beaming smile. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. And that's why what we have to share, Jimmy, is the best news ever. The King is coming, and we are going to live with the Lord Jesus Christ forever and ever and ever. And if folks would like a copy of this, just write us through olivetreeviews.org, olivetreeviews.org. I'll be happy to send them a copy of this. We've sent hundreds and hundreds of these, so feel free to write, folks.
That's fantastic. And Jan, how can people listen to your radio program?
Well, we're on between 900 and 1,000 radio stations. The easiest way is to go to olivetreeviews.org and go to syndication, or just listen on our website. We post new programming once a week, and it airs on our 900 stations on Saturday and Sunday. We've been doing it since 2001, and I've met so many wonderful people, including your friend and my friend, Mark Hitchcock, who's one of my closest confidants and is part of the radio outreach as well.
Well, you have a great website, tremendous resources on Jan's website. Jan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
God bless you. And if you're watching this on YouTube, we're about to go into the subscriber portion of our program. I'm going to answer some questions that our subscribers have written. If you're not a subscriber, go to endtimes.com. It's $7 a month, $77 a year. You can become a subscriber. You get the full podcast, also our articles and videos that come out all week long on endtimes.com. If you're not a subscriber, we want you to become a subscriber today. If you are a subscriber, you cannot watch the entire program on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, go to endtimes.com to see the entire podcast. If you're a subscriber, stay tuned. Welcome to the Tipping Point Show. I'm Jimmy Evans. I'm very excited today to have Bill Koenig joining me. I've mentioned his book, Eye to Eye, on the show many times, and we're going to be talking about it today. Bill is a journalist, and he served as a White House correspondent in 2001 and 2002. He has a news service called Koenig World Watch Daily. His website has constantly updated stories from a large variety of news sources and can be found at watch.org. I read it daily for world news from a biblical end times perspective. Bill, it's an honor to have you joining me today.
Thank you, Jimmy. My pleasure.
Well, I just have a lot of admiration for your work. And you are a journalist. Watch.org, I look at it every day. And just because if it's on your site, I know it's good.
Thank you.
And you have on there a really good end times perspective of what's important and what's going on. Your book, Eye to Eye. Now, this is the book here. Now, the subtitle, Facing the Consequences of Dividing Israel. Okay. So the first time I saw this book and I began to read it, I was dumbfounded because I'm an end times guy. I've kept up with the end times forever. I had no idea that there were this many events that had happened in the United States as a direct result of our foreign policy toward Israel. Why don't you talk about that just a minute?
Well, Jimmy, from having served at the White House for 20 years, had the benefit of being there for a lot of activities having to do with the state of Israel, and especially right after I moved to D.C., left Dallas to move to D.C. right after George W. Bush took office. And I continued to notice that when we would have meetings with the Israeli leaders or the Palestinian officials, we would have something major happen in the United States the same day or within 24 hours. And myself and David Dolan and a few other people had watched this. John McTernan had written something about it. And so we started connecting the dots and had the opportunity in early 2001 to write Israel, the Blessing or the Curse. It's out of print. This book, Eye to Eye, took over from where I left off there. And I was amazed just through the research from what I'd seen and what I saw previous to that. 1991, October 1991, George Bush's father's in Madrid, Spain, calling on Israel to give back land they obtained in the Six-Day War. And at the very time he's at a podium in Madrid, Spain, calling for this, the perfect storm was sending 30-foot waves into his home in Kennebunkport, Maine. It wasn't the next day or a week later. It was at that moment he was calling on Israel to give up their covenant land. So I even warned President George W. Bush right after I became a White House correspondent for an incredible period of time and a very biblically important period of time. I warned him, don't touch the land, in 2 letters. And then 9/11 happened. And what happened, Jimmy, 17 days before 9/11, George Bush was working with Crown Prince Abdullah of Saudi Arabia on what was going to be the most comprehensive address ever given to the UN in September. And on 9/10, the work was done. It was going to call for the division of Jerusalem, the fulfillment of the UN resolutions 242, 338, and 2 states. Something his dad or Bill Clinton would never have done. Never have done that. But 9/10, the work was completed. Prince Bandar from Saudi Arabia, who had worked actively on the peace deal, was celebrating in his mansion in McLean, Virginia. And then he woke up the next day to the horrific incidents of 9/11, the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And one other thing here, Jimmy, the Lord reminded me that he did not produce the evil of 9/11, but he didn't stop them.
That's right. Well, and Jonathan Cahn, who we've had on the show here many times, he just says, God takes down your defenses. You know, the Harbinger, his book, The Harbinger,
Absolutely.
talking about what happened to Israel. What happened here is God's not making it happen; He's just allowing it to happen but there's a direct cause-effect relationship between our foreign policy toward Israel and what happens. And these are many times, if not most of the time, historic natural disasters. Certainly 9/11, but natural disaster, and we're going to talk about Ian here in just a little bit. When you talk about 30-foot waves at Kennebunkport while he's making the speech, and it was a freak storm.
Totally. That's why it was called the perfect storm, because you had a bunch of things that had to happen that produced the perfect storm. And rather than going from west to east, it was going from east to west, which is totally an unusual event, meteorological event, and that's why it was coined the word perfect storm.
So in your book, you have, 120-something?
126.
126 specific examples. And I encourage anybody, if you're a skeptic, get the book. You won't be a skeptic anymore. You can't make this stuff up. This was in the news. Give some other examples of the cause and effect of foreign policy toward Israel and natural disasters in America.
Well, I think one event that everybody remembers is Katrina. It was on the front page of the newspapers in Washington for 34 straight days, whether it was the Washington Post, Washington Times, or the Baltimore Sun. This event was so enormous. And what had happened is 9,500 Jews were forced from their home by the Sharon-Bush plan. And within a few hours of the final eviction of Jews that the Lord had put in their heart to occupy this land, a weather-related storm, even a remnant of a storm that was near the Bahamas, developed into a tropical depression, and within 48 hours it was Tropical Storm Katrina, then Hurricane Katrina. And it was devastating. And I had a friend that had been at the White House for quite a few years, 30 years actually, and she said that President George W. Bush never got over the consequences of 9/11 and Hurricane Katrina. That's significant.
That's exactly right. So Joel 3, God is saying, I'm going to bring all the nations in judgment. And talking about the Valley of Jehoshaphat, it's talking about the Battle of Armageddon. And it says, because they've scattered my people among the nations and they've divided up my land. And so the premise of your book here is God is angry. God is angry with the United States, not necessarily our viewers, not necessarily you and me, but when we elect presidents, especially in this case presidents, when we elect people whose foreign policy toward Israel allows for the division of the land, allows for the two-state solution. Now, this is true today with our president and the prime minister, the current prime minister of Israel, Lapid. And so let's just get political here for just a minute. Not Democrat, Republican, but helping people to understand the consequences of how they vote. So Israel, if you're walking into a voting booth, the foreign policy is a big issue with you, right?
Without a doubt. And one other note, I have 126 events in eye to eye, and then we had about another 12 during President Trump's time in office. And we've had almost $1 trillion worth of weather-related disasters that corresponded to what we were doing with Israel at the time. And even beyond that, Jimmy, 9/11 cost us 6 to 7 trillion.
Wow.
And the coronavirus cost us 6 to 7 to 8 trillion. And both of those have a connection to what we're doing with the land of Israel. So to phrase this is the God of Israel, as you know, the God of Israel gave Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob the land from the Euphrates to the great river, the river in Egypt.
Right.
And this is the covenant land of Israel. Israel's never occupied that.
No.
But as you know, this is his land. It's holy land. And no one has the right to divide or partition, as you mentioned in Joel 3. This land is special. It's God's land.
Yeah.
And anytime someone attempts to create an Arab state in Judea, Samaria, and East Jerusalem, the biblical heartland of Israel, there are consequences. And I also noticed the greater the pressure on Israel to divide this land, the greater the corresponding catastrophe.
No, that's very interesting. So you and I were talking about, of course, I read your book, and now this is the way I think. And so whenever I see a natural disaster, I begin immediately to think.
Record setting.
Record
Yeah,
setting. Okay,
right.
so there was a couple of years ago, I believe it was in December, a series of tornadoes, the longest tornado in American history. Went through 4 states, and it ended up in Kentucky, did historic damage. At the exact same time, the Biden administration was trying to force the Jews to stop building settlements in East Jerusalem. And we also know through President Biden's recent trip to Jerusalem, he went to East Jerusalem, would not allow Israelis to go with him. He openly declared he's for a 2-state solution and for giving East Jerusalem to the Arabs. And so, again, we're going to talk about Ian here in just a minute, but we're seeing historic natural disasters happening still in America, directly related to the foreign policy of America.
And I might add, Jimmy, because a lot of your audience is very appreciative of all the things that President Trump did for our country and also for Israel.
Right.
And I had the opportunity recently to interview Ambassador Friedman in Israel, and I mentioned we've never had a more pro-Israel administration.
No.
Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley, John Bolton stood for Israel at the International Criminal Courts. Friedman, a biblical scholar that can speak Hebrew, that knows the Tanakh or the Old Testament quite well.
Oh.
And I mentioned that President Trump did more for Israel than all our presidents combined.
Yeah.
He moved the embassy to Jerusalem when others promised that. He got out of the Iran nuclear deal. He acknowledged Israel's sovereign right to the Golan Heights, which is critical, as you know, for their defense.
Yeah.
Secretary of State Pompeo said the settlements are not illegal in Judea and Samaria according to the San Remo Agreement of 1920.
Wow.
Defending Israel at the International Criminal Courts. We've never had an administration like this. And we tried. We did a lot to try to persuade President Trump not to get involved with the land, to divide the land. Hurricane Harvey was his first supernatural disaster. It hit Houston, or hit the southern part of Texas very strong in Houston. And I thought, well, what was happening at that time? And I found out that Jared Kushner, really the architect of the Trump Israel plan,
Sure.
he was in Qatar, he was in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, he was in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, he was meeting with Egyptians or Jordanians on what Israel was going to agree to in order of having the deal of the century. And then Hurricane Harvey developed out of a remnant down in the Gulf. So
Was there a part of what he was trying to do that would take the land away?
Oh, absolutely. He was trying to get the Arabs to go along with his plan, which was going to call on Israel to give up 70 to 80% of Judea and Samaria.
Right.
The biblical heartland of Israel. So absolutely, because it was not obvious. I had to dig through Arab press, and I did a lot of reading. I go, this storm, has to have been something that was taking place with Israel's land at the time of this Hurricane Harvey, because it was such an unusual storm, developed out of a remnant, similar to Katrina. It just kind of developed
Yeah.
It wasn't from the Caribbean or off the west coast of Africa. It was very unique. And then I found that out. And we lobbied hard. You know, President Trump, don't do it. Don't get involved. Don't push. And we pushed hard. But there was also others that were within the Christian community that were excited about the Kushner-Trump peace plan.
Well, and Jared Kushner had a huge amount of influence on Trump in that area.
Enormous.
In that arena.
Absolutely.
So you quote Zechariah on your website, watch.org, Zechariah 12, that God's going to make the Jerusalem a burdensome stone.
Absolutely.
And anyone who tries to touch it is going to be cut in pieces. Do you believe that we're living in that day, obviously, where Jerusalem has become the international issue and to those surrounding nations?
No doubt about it. And I think, Jimmy, what's fascinating about all this, despite our president's errors, they are just accelerating final day events to the conclusion of an eventual peace deal. That's when I talk to audiences, I said, Bush and Clinton and George W. and Obama and Trump all had a biblical prophetic role. And I think what's important, and things really accelerated dramatically, January 28, 2020 at the White House, Trump introduced his plan with Benjamin Netanyahu in the audience, and very supportive of the deal. And he came up with a map that there had never been a specific map from the administration that his people put on Twitter. So 76 million people saw this map. And within about 41 minutes of the map being posted on Twitter, we had a 7.7 earthquake shake the Miami financial district. And usually,
it's unbelievable.
It is.
It's unbelievable.
And then that afternoon, according to Peter Navarro, things were breaking loose because of coronavirus. He was telling Fauci and Azar and Mulvaney, the chief of staff,
my God,
we need to do something. This is going to be a disaster. We need to close the air travel to China. Look at closing it to Europe. This is going to be a disaster. They laughed off Peter Navarro. Navarro says, okay, I'm going to put this in memo. Next day, January 29, he put a memo, says this is going to cost 1 million to 2 million lives.
Wow.
It's going to cost us $3.7, $3.8 trillion unless we do something serious. He wrote it to the National Security Council. Also, President Trump, that day they started their coronavirus planning task force. What also happened, Jimmy, within 24 to 48 hours, every major leader around the world said, no, we have our plan. There's a Trump plan, but we have our plan, the two-state plan. We want a balance between the Israelis and Palestinians. So you had Merkel, and then you had Johnson, and then you had Macron, the Arab leaders, Erdogan, and others. So within 20 to 48 hours, along with the Vatican, they all established their position. 7 weeks later, we had 3 billion people in lockdown because of coronavirus worldwide.
And the direct connection, and you're making the direct connection now. I absolutely loved President Trump's positions on Israel.
Absolutely.
So the one thing that he did wrong was to allow for the division of the land of Israel. Now, it's my understanding, I actually said this in a message, and someone corrected me in this, and I want to get your perspective on this. In the deal of the century, there was a part of East Jerusalem given to the Arabs. Is that correct, or is that incorrect?
Well, there's still a debate over that, Jimmy. He basically said Jerusalem's not to be divided. It's Israel's, but at the same time, there was some kind of behind-the-scenes language that might have possibly carved a part of East Jerusalem out for the Palestinians to have a capital. You know, and I talked to Trump administration officials about this. They say, well, we never really expected the Palestinians to comply anyhow. They have a history of that. Sure. But nonetheless, they were going to be 70 to 80% of the covenant land of Israel, Judea and Samaria, was continuing. That narrative was continuing. And it continued the two-state narrative, even all the way up to the Abraham Accords of the summer, leading up to the September 15, 2020 signing of the Abraham Accords. That was the narrative. Arab plan, two-state plan, UN resolutions, and continue that, once again, that narrative of a future Palestinian state.
Well, you said every president has had a role in kind of expediting the end times. And people ask me, because Biden, policy-wise, he's a disaster, and related to Israel, related to, transsexuality, all the stuff that his administration has been trying to promote. But someone asked me, why on earth would the Lord allow President Biden to be elected? Because he had to allow it. It had happened. Well, first of all, we're a democracy. I know we're a constitutional republic, but we elect presidents that way. And I believe that he is expediting end times events very quickly, not in a good way.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
A couple things here, Jimmy. Coronavirus led to vote by mail. And there's always been vulnerability to vote by mail.
Right.
I followed the election 2020 and thereafter, even to this day, on the way out here, I'm still following it closely. I believe there was things that happened that affected the outcome of that election. There was 3-4 states were only 10 to 12,000 vote difference.
Right.
That was our concern, that there was going to be fraud.
Yeah.
He didn't win by that much because, 50, 60,000 votes in those 5 or 6 swing states, Trump would have been the president. But we had the opportunity to warn the administration that this could cost them politically if they went forward with this, and sure enough, it did.
Absolutely.
And that was a big concern, that if they went forward, it was going to be costly, even to the point that if you go forward, it could cost President Trump re-election. And there's no doubt it had an effect. Also, a quick note here, in the summer of 2020, there were some major record-setting hurricanes that all happened and occurred at the time of effort on the Abraham Accords. When they back off for a week or two, a month, nothing would happen. As soon as they got involved again, more hurricanes.
Were they, in the Abraham Accords, were they promising to those Arab nations that there would be a division of the land of Israel? Was that a part of the Abraham Accords?
Well, it was basic. What they said was, we'll stop the extension of sovereignty to 134 Jewish communities, which that's what the Arabs and the international community were after.
Right.
And that was part of the inducement, and that we'll move forward. My problem with the Abraham Accords, it keeps the two-state narrative going.
Right.
The Arab plan of 2002 was re-mentioned.
Right.
The UN resolutions 242, 338 were mentioned again.
Right.
And so that, my opinion, biblically, it's not even my opinion, biblically, Israel has the right to those 134 Jewish communities.
Of course they do.
Rightful extension of sovereignty. But what happened? We had a very disruptive summer, record-setting hurricanes. We had so many events, disruptive events, that they had to go into the Greek alphabet. It's incredible what was happening. But what's really interesting, September 15, 2020, in a signing ceremony at the White House, you got Netanyahu and the Emirates leader and the Bahraini leader and Trump. They signed the agreement, and down in the corner of the TV screen across the country is the signing ceremony and this new hurricane, Sally, that was developing into a monster storm. So the day of the signing,
wow,
it's on the screen. That night, Hurricane Sally came ashore in the southern Gulf Coast. The next day, Kushner's on all these networks talking about the Abraham Accord signing, and in the corner, once again, is this Hurricane Sally. One of my readers from the East Coast said, do you realize that Sally's Hebrew derivative is Sarah?
Oh, gosh.
So in other words, Hurricane Sarah, in the Hebrew name, was slamming into the southern Gulf Coast as the Abraham Accords were being signed. This was an emphasis by the God of Israel that the covenant land of Israel is for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and not their descendants, because the narrative of the Abraham Accords is this land is for all descendants of Abraham. And then 72 hours later, Netanyahu goes home. Israel goes into a 3-week lockdown for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot.
Right.
And cost him 5 billion shekels. And that was one of the incentives of the Abraham Accord. We're going to make a couple $1 billion, US dollars, over the next couple of years. Well, They got a bad start because they're out 5 billion shekels right after the signing in the next 3 weeks.
Well, one of the things that your book it did for me, and you're just, making it even more vivid here, is there's a direct connection between the events that are happening in the world and what's happening in Israel. Israel is the apple of God's eye. Everything, when you go to the Bible, when the Bible says north, it's north of Jerusalem. It's south of Jerusalem. East is east of Jerusalem. God loves everybody. God loves the Arab people. But he has a special relationship with the land and the people of Israel. And so what you're saying is it's a special relationship in two ways. He blesses those who bless Israel. He curses those who curse Israel. And when you're actively working to divide that land, he takes it personally. Now, let me just say, because we're going to start talking about Hurricane Ian, the end of this age happens at Jerusalem. According to Zechariah, according to Revelation, the last scene of this age is the entire world gathers against Jerusalem. If it were not for the United States, the United Nations would have already tried to impose the two-state
Absolutely.
solution. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So only of course, now with President Biden, but you also have Lapid kind of on board. But this thing's going somewhere is what I'm trying to say. The entire Bible is focused on the nation of Israel, and prophetically, it's all going to come down to the city of Jerusalem. And so this is a big deal. So Hurricane Ian, and we are very aware, and Bill and I have talked about this, of all the suffering and the damage that's going on in Florida right now. It's horrific, and our hearts are with every person, our prayers with every person right now who has suffered or has relatives or loved ones that are suffering because of this. So nothing that we're saying we want to say in any way that's insensitive to what has taken place. But I want to say this at this time. So I want to talk about the cause and effect here. Let's start with Hurricane Fiona, because there's a connection there, and then we'll talk about Hurricane Ian.
September 14th, Biden's Middle East envoy, one of his top envoys, is in the Middle East reestablishing, or not even reestablishing, but reconfirming Biden's total support of the two-state plan. This is September 14. Within a few hours, Tropical Depression 7 formed. This storm became Fiona. Fiona developed, produced a tremendous amount of rain, sat in Puerto Rico and moved on. And then the following week, the UN meetings.
Right.
September 21st, Biden's at the UN and reaffirms his administration's commitment to the two-state plan. And this is a time to move forward. The next day, Lapid is at the UN and talks about his full support of the two-state plan. Israeli prime ministers don't do that at the UN.
Right.
And you could hear a collective fury within Israel, in the political circles, the fact that Lapid, who'd been influenced by Biden to do this at the UN, and then later that afternoon, Biden congratulated Lapid for his statement about the two-state plan, and then Canada's Trudeau sent out a tweet fully supporting Lapid's comments about two-state. Fiona was working its way into the Atlantic. Some people thought it would hit Bermuda, but right after Trudeau made those statements, it made a north-northwest turn and ended up hitting Canada the next day, the most intense Atlantic storm in the history of Canada, 24 hours after Trudeau complimented Lapid on making his decision.
And this is a statement we've made consistently during this interview, and that is historic. These are historic catastrophes.
Key. These are the biggest, Jimmy, these are the biggest events. I mean, the 126 events in eye to eye and the 14 after, these are record-setting events. These are the biggest in U.S. history. And that's what's so key. And I noticed the greater the pressure on Israel to comply, the greater the corresponding catastrophe in America.
So, and you're a journalist, and this is why I love your information, is because as a journalist, you observe what's happening and report on it.
Start seeing the patterns.
You're not a preacher. You're not trying to, take the Bible and, manipulate the facts. These are things that have happened that all the world sees. Okay. The only difference is they don't make the connection related to Israel. So you believe that the United Nations preceded the formation of IN.
Yeah, between Biden and Lapid's comments, and then Biden's full support to the public of Lapid's comments, early September 23rd, around 5 a.m. in the morning, Tropical Depression 9 forms. This becomes Ian, and it's never the catastrophe or never the event, the weather-related event, whether it's tornado outbreaks, earthquakes, or hurricanes. It's always an event first, like what Biden did, Lapid did, and then the tropical depression forms. Right after.
Well, Hurricane Harvey, when it hit, and I have a lot of friends down in that area, and it was just horrific. One of the churches that we're very good friends with there, flooded the church, just all the area there. God isn't against Florida. God isn't against Texas. God isn't against Louisiana, or all the places where these events happen. God is against an administration that is elected popularly, but is against an administration trying to put pressure on Israel to divide up the land. And so when you see the historic nature, the horrific, you're talking about the trillions of dollars that these things have cost, you're getting an idea of how angry God is. God's very angry with these, not the people, the individuals of Florida or Texas or anywhere. He's furious at the spirit that is behind these events because it's anti-Semitism. It is against the Jews having their homeland and having it peacefully, right?
That's exactly right. The biblical heartland of Israel. And I re-emphasize that the God of Israel gave the land to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their descendants to occupy.
That's right.
And he gave the Arab and the Middle East countries a tremendous amount of land.
Oh, yeah.
And a tremendous amount of natural resources, oil, natural gas. He blessed them enormously.
Yeah.
But there's this obsession, not only with the Middle East Arab leaders and Shiite and Sunnis, the international community. But that's the beauty of this is, why does a country the size of New Jersey and a city of Jerusalem receive the kind of international attention it receives all the time? And it's remarkable how God has done that. And you mentioned Zechariah 12:3, Jerusalem will become a burdensome stone.
Yeah.
Every Middle East leader right now, and every leader of the world, is in favor of dividing the city of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And there's enormous consequences.
Is there any other capital in the world where there's any serious discussion of dividing Moscow or dividing Tehran or dividing anywhere else? Only Jerusalem. And the Arabs were not interested in Israel, the land of, back then, Palestine. They weren't interested until Israel was interested. And then everybody starts acting like it's something really valuable. It was a wasteland when Israel came back.
Absolutely.
And now, every time I go back, and we're going back again in December, every time I go back, it's more beautiful all the time, the Jewish control part.
It's incredible.
It's incredible. So, Bill, watch.org is one way that people, and I really do encourage you to look at his website regularly, because it's just full of really important news. I like the way your website's formatted, because it's simple, but it just gives you really great headlines there. Is there any other way that people need to contact you, or just at watch.org?
Yeah, watch.org. And also we're developing a site, reach1billion.com. The site is in place. And the purpose of that is we have 1 billion people worldwide that attend replacement theology churches.
Yes, they do.
That's 100 million in America. Protestants and Catholics have no understanding of the biblical significance of the days we're living in the state of Israel. And then at watch.org, every Friday I put out a weekly summary of world news that's biblically relevant. It's a subscription. And the key is and it's difficult to keep it to 18 to 20 pages, as you can relate to, Jimmy, but it's just kind of a summary of what's happening Israel, Middle East, biblically related. And then also we focus a lot on domestic issues in the United States that affect us as Christians.
Well, thank you, Bill, for being with me. I want you to come back now.
Look forward to it.
Because I know that everybody that's watching this. This is amazing, and Bible prophecy is empirical. It's measurable. It's tangible. It's not some esoteric type of thing that kind of you get weird and you kind of have to make it up. Israel exists miraculously for the second time, according to Isaiah 11. They exist. The things that the Bible said would happen in the end times are happening, have been happening for 74 years. And so, and what Bill has done in this book, Eye to Eye, I really do encourage you to get this book. If this is something that's interesting to you, let me say this, if you have unbelieving friends or cynical friends, let them read this book, because this is talking about real life issues that are happening right now. These things are happening right now today. And once you've read this book and listened to Bill, it makes you think differently, because when you see these natural disasters that are happening, and then you see what's happening related to Israel, you begin to see there's a direct correlation. And so I do pray for this election that's coming up that people will get out and vote, and that you'll vote according to morals and vote according to values and not just money and all the things that politicians promise, Republican and Democrat. But vote, and when the presidential election comes up, if we're still here, in 2024, we need to remember that the foreign policy of whoever we elect as President of the United States affects every single individual in a very big way. And when they have bad foreign policy related to Israel, we're all in danger because of that. And so, again, Bill, thank you for being with me. We're going to have Bill back again. Now, we have our subscriber-only portion of the program coming up. I'm going to be answering questions that you guys, subscribers, have written in. If you're not a subscriber, endtimes.com is where you can go. $7 a month, $77 a year. We would love to have you be a subscriber, and you get the entire podcast here. Plus, we have articles and videos that come out all week long talking about end times, talking about things that matter. So if you're not a subscriber, endtimes.com, $7 a month, $77 a year. Now, if you are a subscriber, you cannot watch the entire podcast on YouTube. You have to go to endtimes.com or respond to the email that we sent you as a subscriber. So if you're a subscriber, stay tuned.